Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Enterprise Strategy for Compliance. My name is Dan Doggett, and with me is my co-presenter, Stephen Polacek, and we are the statewide IT Accessibility Initiative. So our goal today is to help you navigate putting together your accessibility roadmap for compliance with the new rulemaking for Title II of the ADA. So today we're going to prioritize how to budget, manage vendors, but most importantly, how to, protect your agency or organization from the risks of noncompliance. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We do have live captioning available today, and you can enable them via the Zoom meeting controls toolbar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel for future reference. So we will send an email out to all the registrants with the link and the slide deck once we have it up and available. And lastly, please feel free to add your comments and questions to the chat or the Q&A section. And I guess Stephen, if you'll look at those while I present, and I'll look at those while you'll present, and we should be able to answer those in real time. And we'll probably have some time at the end, I would assume,
Yeah,
for questions if folks have some.
sounds good.
Okay, so we're going to get started. And Stephen is going to start us off by talking about sort of the current legal landscape and where we are at with that.
Thank you, Dan. Before we dive into it for real, I do want to caution Dan and I are not legal experts.
Oh, yes.
So, everything we're saying here today is things that we have discussed with our peers, other accessibility experts in other states, what we've heard from, actual legal counsel. But ultimately, anything we say today, if you have any questions about application or interpretation, go to your lawyer, go to your attorney general, go to someone who is an actual legal expert. The point of today is to let you know of the strategies that a lot of us at the state level and in other organizations are taking to prepare. So with that, next slide, please. So the deadline itself is April 24th, 2026. We're 3 months away. So there isn't a lot of time. We've had about, you know, we've we've had years to be working on this, but the deadline was set, just over a year and a half ago. So what is going to happen? We're not quite sure, but there are certain things that we can interpret because right now the ADA is still in effect. There has been attempts to use the deadline as a defense, saying, well, we don't have to be compliant until then. And well, no, the ADA still applies. It's just, it's your the technical standards are required at that point, but you still need to be accessible if someone posts a complaint or files a lawsuit. So the expectation really for right now is that justifications are going to be easier rather than saying, I wasn't able to use your service or purchase your product or get information from your website. Now it can be, you're not meeting these technical standards and that's impacting me. And so it's going to be a lot easier to present that evidence of either denial of service or uh, issues with uh, registering for use of something or just even getting information, getting in contact. We are also expecting likely pressure from non-disabled sources. There is concerns about frivolous lawsuits, brought by law firms trying to drum up business or whatever, but there is also going to be probably more either advocacy organizations or health organizations that are going to put pressure on organizations, especially their partners, to meet this compliance. So with only 3 months, everyone's like, well, what do I do? How do I start? Especially if people haven't really been thinking about it up to this point. And that's where we really need to set two main priorities to work on. The first is the main online presence, your website. Get your analytics, start looking through your top 5 pages. work on those, deal with the most basic problems. The second thing you really should do, and this is probably going to be your best defense, is establishing an accommodations process. How are you going to take in complaints or concerns? Who's going to address them? Uh, and set the expectations for a timeline. We'll talk more about that later, but these are our two main priorities for getting ready by that deadline. It doesn't mean you can't, if you miss a deadline, oh well, it doesn't mean that if you're already, you know, pretty well in hand, it doesn't mean you can just ignore it. These are just the main things we need to think about at this time. This is always accessibility is a journey. You hear that at every presentation ever about accessibility. So, keeping in mind that if you've already started and you're already a good ways through your website, wonderful. Start looking at some of your more niche areas or your YouTube channel or things like that. Figure out anywhere you can make improvements and keep on it. I do also want to mention, that there is the possibility of the ADA being used either by DOJ or by other organizations in a method that it really shouldn't be. We are expecting more pressure from legitimate sources, but there also could be pressure from non-legitimate sources or a vehicle for other problems. So I do want to mention that there other factors may limit that, but it is still a concern. So it's not something that we can either set aside because it's not a priority on the federal level or whatever. It's also not something that we can only assume private usage. So be prepared for both cases. Next slide, please. So what counts as digital content? What are we talking about? There's a lot of stuff under there. So the ADA defines digital content as the information and sensory experience to be communicated to the user by means of a user agent, e.g., a web browser, including code or markup that defines the content structure, presentation, and interactions. This includes text, images, sounds, videos, controls, animations, and conventional electronic documents. It's a really long-winded way of saying anything you provided that can be viewed or used through a screen interface. So if it can be accessed through your phone, through a tablet, through your desktop, your laptop, whatever, it's something that either a browser or a program like Word can open and use and present to someone, you're responsible for that content. That falls under ADA. So your newsletters, your social media posts, any content on your website, YouTube videos, if you're sending someone something through an email, that counts too. So all of these things are things that we had to think about. It does sound like a lot, but Dan will be telling you more about how you can prioritize and how some of these little things can be taken care of before they get to be a problem. Next slide, please. So defining compliance. So ADA set in the rulemaking, set the standard at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1A and AA. And these are international standards created by the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as W3C. And these standards are pretty well used across the board. On the in industry, it's used significantly. A lot of universities point to it. Other countries and their laws point to it. So it's a pretty well-known standard. We go into it in detail in other webinars that you can see on our YouTube channel, so I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but it's built on 4 areas: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, also known as 4. So we need to make sure content and any mobile apps or anything we're producing is usable through another sense. So we don't have to rely on a single sense to actually get information from it. We can use it with a variety of devices. So that's operable and a number of ways to interact with that device. Make sure it's understandable, that all of our content provides feedback to users, that they can understand what we're asking from them in the case of a form or other interaction. And then finally, robust, which is making sure it works with as many possible other uh, technologies out there. because the standards by themselves, they improve things, but they're a basis for accessible material. They're not going to be full on completely accessible. The point of them is to take care of a lot of common issues that would be an issue no matter what you're using, and then also make sure that your content and your product is compatible with the majority of assistive technology, or AT. I do want to mention sometimes you hear about 508 compliance. So, Section 508, which is the federal law for accessible information technology and procurement. That's a different standard. It is 508 is based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it's based on the 2.0 standard, which is a little bit older and is missing a few key features, such as mobile accessibility. So, content on a website that reorganizes to fit the screen, or in some cases providing feedback to users, so the communicating of, say, error messages or changes in content to a user who might not be able to see it, uh, who's using a screen reader to pick it up, or someone who is using magnification and doesn't see it happen because it's off screen for them. So this is where WCAG is making sure that we're taking care of a lot of the most common scenarios, and 508, which did do that, is missing a few things. So if something's 508 compliant, it might not be ADA compliant. So be aware that it does help meet the standard and it's great, but there might be more to it than that. So if you're 508 compliant, double check that you're fully ADA compliant, because they're missing a few things. Next slide, please. So 100% compliance is kind of a myth. Like, so you might be able to achieve it once, which would be phenomenal. Like, your whole website's completely accessible. We scan every page you have. It's great. But that can change in an instant. You change content, you forget to add a heading, you forget to add alt text to an image, all in a single article, and now you're not 100% compliant. Or say a backend software changes, something on the server on where your website is hosted, or something happens with how that server communicates with the user, or Chrome updates or Firefox updates, and that browser compatibility messes with how the site reorganizes and reflows to fit on a phone versus a desktop. All of these things can have an impact on your accessibility. So, what's important, and really the goal of the ADA, is to make sure that we're thinking about accessibility and we're monitoring it, that it's part of our process, so that we're sure that any material that we're producing, so any new documents going out, newsletters, emails, press releases, videos, all of these things, that we have a step in our process that we are looking at it, making sure that we have captioning, that things have headings, and everything's accessible before it leaves our desks. And we have a plan for how to handle accommodation requests or ADA complaints quickly. That's something that people don't always think about, or they have the language but they don't necessarily know how to actually handle it when and if it does come up. We've seen that happen before, where complaints registered and the person who receives it isn't sure where it's supposed to go or who's supposed to handle it. So we need to have that documented and mapped out, so that these are done in a reasonable time frame, so that that person isn't waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 days to get what they need. Or if that is needed, we're communicating with them why and walking them through everything. So the goal here is the prioritization. Take care of the major problems first. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are split into three levels: level A, level AA, and level AAA. And we always tell people focus on the level A items first. We call those criticals or critical blockers, because those are things that can stop people from using your services entirely. So things like alt text, where we're not getting information that's available through that image, especially if it's an image that shows text on screen, or error messages on a form field, or labels on a form field. I don't know what this form is asking me if I'm using a screen reader, when I go to it because visually there might be first name there that tells me visually this is asking for my first name. But if the field itself doesn't have the attribute that tells the screen reader that too, that person has to either go find that themselves from context and hopefully get it right, or they might not be able to get it at all, depending on how it's set up. And that means they can't fill out that form. So these are the things you need to look at first. So when you're prioritizing, and Dan will talk about this more in the risk management section, you need to think of what is stopping someone from using this and how can I address that and address those things first and then move to the next level. One last thing about this, the exceptions that are in the Title II rulemaking, there are 5 of them. They're not a get out of jail card. A lot of people think, oh, I can, just archive everything and then it's accepted. No. One, if someone makes an accommodation request, you still have to fulfill that. The exceptions do not protect against that. No matter what, if an ADA request is fulfilled, you have to, or is received, you have to fulfill it. The second thing is really the intentions of the exceptions was to limit work to meaningful, useful information. So rather than remediating, social media posts from last year or, your newsletter or meeting notes from 3 years ago that people might not be uh, using or, going to that frequently, that you're again putting into process how to deal with new information and that anything that you're using right now, like if you have any forms that people are supposed to fill out to use your services or buy your products, anything like that needs to be addressed immediately. We call those transactional documents. So things that you are sending out regularly uh, and people are getting information from immediately, those are things you need to prioritize. Don't worry about those older documents unless someone requests them. Think about things that you are using all the time. If you're sending out flyers or brochures, those, even if they were, created 5 years ago, you're still using them now. And those are things that need to be remediated. Next slide, please. So how do we implement this? Because we can't just, try to just jump in and start fixing things. We need to prioritize. We need to choose what we're doing. We also need to make this part of our work process because otherwise we're just going to kick the can down the road and have to go through all these problems again. So that's where the strategic lift comes into play. Next slide, please. So first thing we should always point out that you'll hear again and again is the cost of retrofitting. You know, having to go back and remediate, having to fix things after the fact. It's always more expensive. Um, you'll hear a lot of analogies about this, but ultimately the takeaway is if you build something, your branding or your website, launch it, and then you have to go back and change everything again. That's man hours that you're paying for, development time you're paying for. That is going to take longer in some cases because now they have to fiddle with things without breaking the existing code versus taking a look at it ahead of time. So even something as simple as, a color contrast issue in your branding, your links across your whole website, they're controlled by a single, entry on your style sheet. But if it works in 3 places, but there's 2 places it doesn't, that's an issue. But now you have to either go back and make sure it works specifically in that point or redo your whole branding to make sure it works. And that can be a problem. It can also bottleneck a project. I mean, we see this quite often where either it's left to a single individual to fix everything, which is a lot of time that they're committing, or they're not able to work on new projects, or it's a small team, or it's split across teams where this happens, especially if you're using a vendor and you uh, put in a ticket to your vendor to fix a menu on your website so that it's keyboard navigable. And that person can fix maybe the drop downs, but they fix it only on a single page because that's all they can access. If it's on a system level, where the whole product is a different team. They have to send it to the other team, and who knows where that you are in their ticketing system, their queue. And so that kicks out the timeline of getting these fixes addressed way down the road. That's where, that's a problem that we face a lot now because a lot of the markets we're working with are not mature enough. They haven't they've started building accessibility into their processes, but their current products haven't reached that level yet. So there's a lot of patching. And this is where we have an opportunity to make sure that doesn't happen in the next, scenario, because otherwise it's on one person or, we have to rebuild a whole section. And that's a lot of development time that costs a lot. Next slide, please. So how do we work that into our process? What should we think about? Um, there's a lot of number of ways, or sorry, that was not the best way to put that. But there's a number of ways, even for simple things like your documents or your newsletters or uh, you know, your content creation. It doesn't have to be like all software development. So when you're deciding on your branding or you're building a website, start with your color palette. It's really simple to find a color contrast analyzer. Adobe has one, WebAIM has one. Um, there's others out there from other accessibility consultants. Most of them are free to use, and you can select like up to 5 swatches that you can use and see to make sure that everything is either contrast compliant with each other, or you can set it up so that you know, like these 3 colors I can use for text and backgrounds, and these other 2 colors can only be used for decorative elements that are not anywhere near my text. By doing that and setting that up, and then using that across the board, we never have to think about that issue again. And that's what leads into the templates and your components, where if we build a checked once, used everywhere library, things that we're using often, your newsletters, your letterhead documents, annual or quarterly reports, meeting notes, anything like that. If we build templates that we know are accessible, they already have the logo in there that has alt text, they already have headings pre-programmed in certain spots. All we have to do is add our content and double check anything new we've added. We don't have to worry about, does this have all of these elements of accessibility every time? And it saves us a lot of work in the long run. And that's where sometimes the source documents is really important because, a document can change hands multiple times before it's published. And we don't want to bottleneck it at the web manager or the web team who has to double check it and fix it. And they might misinterpret your alt text, or they might put in alt text that's generic, but it wasn't really aligning with your message. And they might struggle and have to spend extra time on it. But if the original writers of this document, HR team, legal team, content creation team, who have you, is able to create their version with these accessible materials, so your alt text on images, your heading structure, tables, anything like that, they can do that before they send it, and it saves a lot of time. Common area this comes up is PDFs, because in order to remediate a PDF, you need a paid service. Acrobat Pro, Foxit, Common Look, any of these kinds of tools you have to pay a subscription fee for. So usually only a few people might have a license, but that's a lot of time to make them fix every part of the document. But most everyone in your office probably has Word or an equivalent, and most of them have the ability to put in, alt text or headings or whatever, and export it correctly. They can save it to a PDF with the accessibility tags included, so that the person who gets the PDF and has to polish it, well, they might only have to say, oh, there's a few blanks because you pressed enter in between paragraphs, or oh, this reading order got slightly messed up. Okay, I just have to move these 2 things. They only have to spend 5 minutes on it versus maybe 5 hours because they have to remake the document from scratch in Acrobat. So it doesn't require everyone to have an Acrobat license. There's a lot you can do ahead of time that saves time later down the road. Next slide, please. And so software development. There's two main schools of thought here, and I'm not a developer. I have a little bit of technical experience. I work with developers a lot, and this really comes down to how that development cycle runs. Is it in waterfall? So it's going from major step to major step. Your builds, you're doing a whole complete build before you move into testing, before publishing. Or are you doing agile, where you're working on a component, building it, putting it out, and then building the next component, and you're going in those kind of smaller iterations in order to build the building blocks of the whole scale product? In both cases, obviously need to think about accessibility, but it comes down into where are you thinking about it? So in Waterfall, we have the opportunity for dedicated stages. We have one at the start where we're developing the idea behind the product, and we need to think about, what like things like our branding, or, what code do we need to incorporate in order to make sure it's accessible. But then we can do our development and then have a dedicated stage afterwards where we test for accessibility and send it back if needed, and then it can go to QA after it passes accessibility. And we can do that between every major development cycle. So there's a dedicated stage there. Agile is a bit different because it's still similar idea in that you'll think about it as you develop the idea, build it into it as you're coding, making sure you have all the attributes and variables you need. And then you can have that testing part, but then that's for that component. And then you need to make sure that there's a larger scale test of how does this component work with this other one that you've built, because if you've made each individual part accessible, but a user struggles to get from part to part to part, you're not accessible in the grand scheme. So there's another area of we need to think about this in relation to other parts, because it's not just I can use this part, it's I can use the whole product. And finally, you want to always make sure that you have subject matter expert support on hand for all stages. There's a lot to accessibility. And, it's always great to hear when developers or coders or communications staff, office workers have some experience and they can do their part because everyone plays a role. But having someone they can go to for questions of how do I deal with this, or I'm struggling with this, making this, a heading, or I'm struggling making this keyboard navigable, having an expert they can go to address those more niche problems, or complicated issues that they're encountering because of a bug or something, helps a lot. So you always want to have someone on staff who's dedicated specifically to accessibility. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan to talk about the prioritization and risk management, the second part of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So like a lot of people probably on this call, um, we've seen this all the time where someone learns about the Title II deadline and then they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, how do I even start to think about this? It can be overwhelming, especially if you are at a large company or agency with maybe thousands of documents on your websites and hundreds of pages. So how do we uh, how do we manage this? So if you look at your entire digital footprint, so that's every PDF, every page, every application, every portal. Like I said, you're going to feel overwhelmed, and that's natural. We see it all the time. One thing to keep in mind is that the Department of Justice doesn't expect you to just fix 10,000 pages like tomorrow. Like that's not like no one sees this as a realistic expectation. What they want to see though is a rational plan. But think of it like, like a hospital triage. You go to the emergency room and it's not necessarily going to be, one person after another that gets treated. No, they will. I mean, if anyone here has ever watched a show like The Pit, they treat like the most critical patients first, like the emergency ones, need to be treated first. So first, you want to, secure your front door. So, Stephen talked about pulling analytics from your web pages and seeing, the pages that have that are used the most. But start with your home page and your main navigation. How to like what are the things that people see the most when they go to your website or service. Um, so we've got our front door. The second, you want to fix your essential services. So these are the things that, the majority of people that come to your web presence need to do. So, in state government, if a resident can't pay a bill or complete a form, that's sort of like where the highest risk is that we want to, prioritize. And then, as we talked about before, um, we don't want to just fix it once and then wait for the next time. You want to stop the bleeding. So whatever you publish from, that day moving forward, you want to make sure that any new information, any new content is accessible. So you don't want to just go back and, remediate a bunch of PDFs and then start creating new ones that will also be inaccessible. And so, we'll stress this all the time, but accessibility is not just the problem for the web management team. It has to be a team sport. And Stephen talked about how along the cycles, especially if you're working in agile, everyone needs to sort of come to the table with some accessibility knowledge. So it's really got to be a team sport. You think of your subject matter expert, think of that person sort of like Google Maps. So they're not the ones that are driving the car. They're not the ones that are building the components, but they're there to tell the driver where the roadblocks are, where they need to be worried about. And so for those of you who are in leadership, you are the architects. Your job is essentially to clear the path. So if you don't have the team, if you don't give the team like the time or the budget to do this right, that subject matter expert is just a voice that you're going to ignore. And I've had situations where I've just ignored the GPS unit in my car, and you always wonder if it's getting mad at you or something like that. But I'm sorry, I'm straying off the subject here. Uh, Okay, so yeah, leadership, you are the architects. You are the ones that, set the standard. And in terms of developers and designers, these are the builders. These are the people that build the actual things that you need to, prioritize. And so, they are looking to the leaders to prioritize that quality over speed, especially when it comes to accessibility. So one of the things that people sometimes forget about is third-party content. So within Title II, you are legally responsible for the tools that you purchase and use. So if you pay for an HR portal or a data set plugin that isn't accessible, you own that barrier to people in the eyes of the law. So that means from now on, you need to make sure that you are buying, you know, you're procuring content and materials that are compliant. Okay. When a vendor tries to sell us something, we ask for a VPAT. So a VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template. And so if a third party makes sure that their content is accessible, they go through the steps of going through this document and showing where it meets the WCAG guidelines or where it fails them and why, and if they have a plan in place to fix those things. So if they can't explain how their tool works for someone, like using a screen reader, we shouldn't be giving them our money, especially now that we have this law in effect, we need to build that requirement right into the contract so that the risk stays with the vendor and not with us. And so that's actually something that we have been doing here at the state of Maryland, is building that into our procurement contracts, and something that is very important that we stress everyone should be doing moving forward. Okay, so we have gone through the process. We've uh, built in accessibility. We've purchased all the accessible materials. We've gone back and remediated things. How do we sustain this? How do we make this something that we can continue doing moving forward? So, as we said, accessibility is a journey. It will never be a one and done project. It's kind of like going to the gym. You can't just go once and say you're fit for life. I really wish that were the case, but it is not. So we suggest a hybrid approach when it comes to your testing life cycle. So we have automated tools, we have manual testing, and we have user feedback. So think of automated tools like a smoke alarm. They're great for catching the obvious stuff, things like missing alt text, and they run in the background, so you don't even have to worry about them. But an automated test only can tell you if errors exist. It doesn't provide insight or context on like the user experience. So, for instance, things like keyboard navigation, making sure that it has a logical order for the flow of your website, or making sure that your heading structure makes sense, that certain the structural the headings fit in a way that makes sense for the content that you're putting together. And so for that, you want to do some manual testing. We recommend once a year, using ideally people with disabilities who use assistive technology to go through your content and inform you where that logic breaks down, or where things can get finicky. Understand that machines will catch code errors, but humans will actually catch like things that are frustrating, and that's probably the most important part. So, how much needs to be done within your team, and what should be done by external partners? So, is this something that we have to do ourselves? Do we hire it all out? In the beginning, um, getting external experts is a great way to do a health check on your company or agency, and they can provide leadership with like an unbiased look at where you currently are. But long term, and it makes a lot more sense to build your own internal muscle. So we want accessibility champions within every department. We want them in HR, marketing, IT, people who get it on a fundamental level. Keep in mind, these people don't have to be accessibility subject matter experts, but they do need to have that foundational understanding that they can apply it to their specific work. So keep in mind, it is much cheaper to train your own staff to do it right the first time than to pay a consultant to fix it after that. I see we have a comment in the chat. Given that a significant portion of accessibility compliance addresses the needs of users with visual impairment, would you recommend an agency invest in screen reader software for internal testing and validation? That's a really, really good question, Valerie. And the short answer is, well, I would say yes and no. The good news is there are open source products available. So there is, yeah, so Stephen is linking to it right now. There's a screen reader called NVDA that is free and you're able to download it. It's for PC. And this, along with JAWS, which is a paid service, are probably the two most widely used screen readers. For Apple users, there's VoiceOver, which is already included in your on your operating system. But so actually, so Stephen says that NVDA is the most commonly used. Wow, that's interesting. So
It's
um,
one of it and Jaws, like the last couple of years have
oh,
been jockeying for the top place. Like I think last year it was, and now I think Jaws caught up or passed it again. But effectively, they're pretty much right in line with each other, you know.
yeah, I now I do think, screen reader testing is something that is great to do. You know, at an agency level when you can. I mean, now that is screen reader testing is manual testing. So that's going through your documents, going through your websites, and navigating it as someone who, would use a screen reader would. Um, I would say so, I test with a screen reader, Stephen tests with a screen reader. Um, Neither of us are native screen reader users. Uh, I would say, the best case, if you're looking for, how do we make this, um, you know, you, you want to test for the with the people the way that people who would normally use those devices would. Um, but you could certainly learn to, use screen readers. I think we do have some trainings on our YouTube video about sort of using screen readers. Um, but it's, they're relatively easy to sort of download. I will say, you know, NVDA and JAWS are probably a little bit, I don't know. What would you say that the learning curve on them versus VoiceOver? Uh,
VoiceOver just works a bit differently because since it was built into the operating system and it's an Apple product, it works more based on how a lot of Apple products set up. So it's a lot of more like group navigation, like you go to a thing, then you have to go into the thing in order to look at its parts. Um, NVDA and JAWS are kind of equivalent. There's some nuance between them. JAWS is a bit more powerful as well, but there is, if you know one or the other, you'll probably be able to understand the other one. Um, so, voiceover, I would say, is mostly is where you have an expert, and you're kind of more checking for compatibility. But as long as you're testing with at least one of them, you're probably okay for most things. Where it kind of sticks is when you have something like a mobile application or a web application. So if you have like a database system where you're registering to use a service like um, I'm trying to think of something like if your MVA account, if you log into that and then you're moving through its services and such, you might find some differences there. But for a lot of basic content, you're not going to notice a difference between any of the three.
yeah, thank you, Stephen. Okay, so let's move on here to our final slide. So, at the end of the day, you know, Steve and I, we are accessibility advocates. This is something that we preach all the time. We want to move away from, is this legal to a framework of, is this usable? So we need to change our like definition of done, like what that means. And so a project isn't finished because the code might work. It's finished when people can actually use it. So when we think about our residents or our customers as real people with different needs, the checklists will, ultimately take care of themselves. So accessibility isn't like a chore necessarily. It's just how we do good work. So it's about making sure that no one is left out of the digital conversation. And with that, I want to take an opportunity to answer any other questions folks have.
I do
Uh,
want to add one
yeah, go
last
ahead.
thought that I realized we really should cover because it's starting to come up is as the deadline's drawing closer, there's a lot more vendors popping up offering services. you need to be careful of who they are. Big players like that have been known for years, like Site Improve or DQ, you know, you can look at them and you'll know what their service is, but they're pricey. But we're starting to see more people coming out of the woodwork randomly, like just person trying to just, make a quick buck offering PDF remediation or things like overlays where they're like, we'll sell you a tool and you can put it into your website and it'll make your website accessible. That's already been legally struck down. There's already precedent in multiple court cases saying that an overlay is not sufficient. You need to make the base product accessible. Or in some cases, companies have gone after the overlay companies for because they still got an ADA complaint afterwards. So one, don't rely on overlay. Think of it as an additional tool, but it's not going to solve your problem. It's not a defensible solution either. And then two, uh, verify the vendors who are offering services because more and more of them are popping up and trying to offer like, yeah, we'll fix your documents for free and or for a cheap price or something, and some of them can be very pricey or they can take forever or not get it done or not do a sufficient job. So be careful if you look at outside vendors to help you get this work done.
Yeah, I would also just to add to that. So that's a really great point, Stephen. So we went to a digital accessibility conference earlier this fall, and you know there's a lot of speakers and a lot of vendors who have new tools. And obviously, you can't walk anywhere, regardless of whether accessibility or anything. You can't walk anywhere without hearing AI. Everyone thinks that they have a tool that's going to solve everything with AI, and that may happen one day. But I feel confident saying right now if anyone tries to tell you that they have an AI powered tool that will solve all of your issues with in one instant is misleading you at best. And we're seeing this a lot now with like PDF remediation tools, AI driven PDF remediation. Um, some of it can be decent, but uh, I I see AI remediation the same as those automated tools like Axe or Wave that will show you those code issues. Manual testing or manual looking through through those documents is always going to be needed to make sure that those tools are actually working.
Yeah, the AI tools they might be good starting places.
Yeah.
Like videos is a big thing of AI captioning. You can throw a video on YouTube, leave it unlisted, and run the captioning on it. He'll probably get it to 80 to 90% correct, but there's still going to be words it messes up, and it's not going to put in like syntax or diction. So, you need to add punctuation in order to make sure that that meeting, what's the old example? Like, let's eat grandma, that example there, like things like that. It doesn't put that in. So you need to go in and edit them to make them 100% accurate because that's what's going to be looked for. But it can save you time, just as Dan said, it's never going to be the be all end all, like anything out there. And the vendors themselves will admit it if you ask them. Like everything is going to require a human to look at it afterwards to make sure it A, did it correctly, and B, there's a lot of user experience issues that it doesn't look for, and you need to make sure. Yes, so Maryland state agencies, I'm sorry, the question is, do you offer any formal training programs to other state agencies? So our office is mandated to help other state agencies with education and training on accessibility. You can reach out to us at mdod.nva@maryland.gov, uh, and we will reach out to you to help schedule that. If you need an evaluation or something, you can put in a do it intake ticket, and it'll come to one of our teams to do perform the evaluation. Those are free of charge to state agencies. If you're outside the state, we can offer consultations at this time where, we meet and chat for half hour, 45 minutes, kind of walk through what you guys do. Um, we're looking at maybe offering other services in the near future outside of that, but for right now, that's limited. Um, if you're, another state's, organization, still happy to chat with you and try and help you guys work through it. Or maybe put you in contact with the right people at your state because we are part of a larger state collaboration group of us and our peers. And so we know people in about 35 states now, I think, whose job it is to kind of do the same thing we do. So, you know, reach out anytime. At the very least, we'll try and direct you to where you can find the right resources for you. But yeah, if you're inside Maryland, we're here to help.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Let me go check the,
There's nothing in Q&A right now.
yeah, nothing in the Q&A. Oh, we have something just,
Hmm.
and so Valerie says, in addition, what is your process for validating that a document has been fully remediated from an IT perspective, especially before posting to our website?
I feel like that's a little loaded. So in general, uh, yes, please reach out if you're inside Maryland. That's what we're here for. Um, but in general, like checking every single document is incredibly difficult and time consuming. You know, really, again, that's where the process comes into place. And if we have that set up right, we can put some faith into it. So usually what we tell people is a Word document or a PDF document, run the automated checker, and when you're first starting out, have someone run through it, at least with maybe like, not just the automated checker, but visually inspect it. Like, are there actual headings here? You know, and does this make sense to me? Because the reading order, you can kind of follow the keyboard cursor. You don't have to use a screen reader for at least that, because if you see your cursor going down, then jump to the right and then go to the left, you might not want it to do that. So, think about that kind of thing. And then the full remediation really comes down to how confident are you? Uh, you know, for a subject matter expert like Dan or I, there's a lot we can do to reach that level. But that's where we're telling people prioritize the most critical things, having alt text, having a proper heading structure, tables. I'm trying to remember the other 6 steps. It's over there, so I can't read it from here.
Yeah.
But
Contrast,
yeah.
uh, links.
Mm.
Uh,
And I think captions for video and media.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So those 6 areas, we're not telling people like go down all of the guidelines one by one, especially if they're completely new to accessibility. Usually we tell people hit these core areas, make sure that you've addressed those because that's going to take care of like 80% of your problems initially. And from there, we can expand on it. So ultimately, I guess that was the long-winded way of answering your question. The short version is, do the automated check, then have someone at the final stage do the final kind of polishing and do the manual check, and then you can feel confident in posting it.
I will also say this, and this is my subject that I keep bringing up all the time,
Mm,
especially for state agencies or uh, groups that have large amounts of documents that they're putting on their websites. Not all document types are equal. And I say that because PDFs, in terms of remediating them and making them accessible, you're going to find a lot more challenges than a Word or Excel or a PowerPoint um, document. So ask yourself before you take that Word document and make it a PDF, does it need to be a PDF? Can it stay a Word document? Because Word documents uh, can be read with screen readers just as well. So keep that in mind
if
when
not easier.
what's yeah, if not easier. So keep that in mind in terms of your process moving forward, because there's a lot, a lot more things that can catch you up with the PDF.
And to add on to that too, now that I'm thinking about it, is a lot of challenges come from older documents that were generated in programs that didn't have all these tools we have now. So in some cases, think about like, is this something, if it's something in current use, like a brochure or a flyer, think about maybe making a new version. Sometimes it's just easier just to get rid of the old one. One thing we're also telling people at the state level, and this is guidance from the Department of IT, Office of Accessibility, is this is a good opportunity to call all of your old material that's past your retention policy requirements. There's no point in remediating a document if you can just get rid of it because it's 12 years old and no one looks at it anymore. That's the kind of thing of like, do some spring cleaning while you have the chance, because that might take care of a large amount of your problems.
Okay, great. All right. Any more questions? This has been really great. So thank you all for, for your comments and questions here today. All right. I'm not seeing anything on my end.
Nope,
Uh,
all good.
okay, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Like I said, we'll be sending out the slide deck and the recording for this probably later this week or early next week once we have everything ready to go. So thank you again, and we'll see you all next time.